So our first presentation this afternoon will be, as I said, by Sandra Carrillo, who is joining us from Peru, I think, Sandra. The title of her presentation is Visions and Perspectives on Climate Change in Mining Companies in Latin America. So let me pass it right over to you and you can jump right in. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to share with you all this panel. My research and paper is focused on the climate change perspectives in Latin America in the sector of mining. This is particularly relevant in the context of the low carbon energy transition globally. And surely this boost of the mining sector due to the critical minerals is having a great impact, economic and also environmental and social, that will be addressed by the presentation. So please, could you help me with the next slide? Well, yes, Linda.
Apologies. No, I was just going to say you should be able to move them yourself, but if not, the organizers will assist. If the bar at the top is orange in color, it means you have presenter rights. If it's green, then the organizers will change for you.
It's green.
All right, they'll move you.
Yes, sure. Well, first of all, the context, the study context. I would like to share some ideas concerning the Latin American mining relevance in the context of global transition. As I already mentioned, we have a really big need of critical minerals up to 2050 to meet the global goals. This will require an increase of critical minerals by nearly 500%. This is really important. Therefore, this clean energy transition will be mineral intensive, and these have several implications for Latin America, which is a region very important in the mining exploration and operation for this globally value chain. So that's why this mining sector should be proactive in Latin America, considering that this supply of critical inputs to the mining process is likely to face greater constraints in the environmental and also the field of climate adaptation. And this is particularly relevant in the context that Latin America is already vulnerable to climate change. So in this context, what is happening with these mining companies in Latin America? My paper is particularly focused on understanding what is the approach of these companies to climate change and what are they doing so far in order to meet the headquarters commitments and the progress at the global level to create these climate action plans. I think that I already have the permission to manage the slides. Hope so. Okay. So what is happening with the literature and all the papers are already on board at the global level? It's very interesting to find that these pressures and challenges for the sector are already studied at the global level. This is expected a water scarcity in the mining areas due to extreme temperatures, which may also raise the levels of conflict, which is one of the key challenges to make the operations available in Latin America. This one of the main fields that companies focus today is the social licenses. So maybe the social license will be more complicated due to the water scarcity projected for the upcoming years. And also, in the adaptation area, we also have some greater illnesses and incidents of people that are projected in the mining value chain due to this high temperature. So that's also other topic relevant to be considered so far and from this point in the mining sector. And also, since all this context could have an impact on the mining production and also the revenues, this is also important for the economic local growth due to the relevance and the importance of the mining sector in the local economy. So this is, from adaptation perspective, some key ideas about what has been already studied as the Global Academy. And in the second field concerning climate mitigation, so far there are some figures concerning the mining industry footprint, which account for 4 to 7% of global carbon emissions. So this is not a sector high intensive in carbon footprint. However, if we consider the scope 3 related to the supply chain, we would be talking about 28% of the global emissions. So scope 3 is definitely more important than in carbon intensity than the scope 1 of 2 and 2 for this sector. And we should be expecting them that these mining companies already assess the scope 3 and also manage this impact. So in this, from this context and the literature review, the paper is focused on characterize the vision of mining companies on climate change. There were selected 17 companies, leading mining companies in Latin America, to assess what they are already committing and also the strategic plans that they are managing to approach climate change from the disclosure and also the speech of CEOs at the public level, and also through some interviews, and also understanding the scope of the climate change strategies for mitigation and adaptation. And in the third place, also to what extent they are focusing on ecosystem restoration as part of the climate change vision. Now we are going to see some ideas and preliminary results about this. So I already shared about this. These were 17 leading mining companies, particularly in Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. And some topics revised were the climate change policy and commitment, the carbon footprint, and especially the scope of measurement, the mitigation strategy, if they have already set goals, and if these goals are in the 3 scopes. Also, if they have an adaptation strategy related to climate risk and the elaboration of adaptation plans. And finally, the biodiversity and nature, if there is a link with the climate strategy. So some preliminary results that I would like to share. The first thing is that most companies have established a commitment to climate change. That's a fact from these 17 companies reviewed. However, the majority of them, like 90%, is focused on the reduction of emissions and the reduction of emissions of scope 1 and 2. So far, non-company of the mining sector in Latin America has committed with the reduction of the scope 3. We'll see why. Concerning the mitigation strategy, most companies in Latin America only assess and manage the scope 1 and 2 of their carbon footprint, even though headquarters are already setting goals for scope 3. So there is a gap between the headquarters commitment and what is happening in Latin America. Therefore, scope 3 is completely excluded from the commitment and also the management, because they are not already assessing the scope 3. So the emission reduction goals, even considering only scope 1 and 2, is in a range of 0 and 30% by 2030, which is far below from Paris Agreement. And there is a risk also of greenwashing in the use of the terminology of net zero emissions if most companies are not even assessing the scope 3 with the high contribution to the carbon footprint. And concerning the adaptation strategy, very few companies have assessed the climate risk for their operations. Only 2 of 17 leading companies have a TCFD report or understanding of their climate risk. This is really worrying because of the relevance of this. Sorry, I just look into the chat. Okay, no, not for me. And also the approach to biodiversity and nature is related to the reduction of environmental negative impacts from operation. In other words, this regulation about nature and biodiversity is with the perspective of do not harm or reduce impacts instead of understanding the climate risk that we have as a geography. And also this approach to biodiversity and nature is not yet connected with a climate change perspective, which was one of the questions of the paper. I would like to answer. So just to sum up the conclusions and final remarks. First of all, the reporting of environmental information in most cases is complying with the current local regulations and GRI standards. That's important. But there is an important opportunity to integrate the impacts of climate change into the mining industry and collaborate with other stakeholders in the field of adaptation. There is still no link between social risk and the perspective of the financial assessment in the field of climate change. And also, if you could please, I saw something happen. Just to make the final remark. Sorry, someone moved the presentation. Thank you. And also, well, there are some carbon offset efforts based on the reforestation without having a science-based understanding on adaptation and nature and biodiversity. So this is the presentation. Thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and apologies once again for throwing you into the hot seat by presenting first with the delay. I know that Dana Silva has joined us, who's our first presenter, but I think, Dana, if you don't mind, I'm going to move our next presentation to Jamie Wallish, who follows directly after Sandra, and then I will circle back to the start again, if that's all right with you. I don't see any questions in the chat box yet for you, Sandra, so we'll reserve some time at the end to get back to you if there are any questions with regards to your presentation. So with that, let me introduce Jamie Wallish, who's joining us, I think, from Washington, D.C., an early start. The title of the presentation is, I'm not sure, #50, you are the people you surround yourself with, the journey of sustainable supply chain readiness. Jamie, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jamie Wallish. I work for a company called Ascent, and we help support durable good or complex good manufacturers in the supply chain data management space. So with that being said, we're just going to jump right into it. Okay. All right, great, thank you. So just to quickly go over the agenda super briefly, what I'm going to touch on in our conversation today is why ESG matters in supply chain data management, how integrating ESG or sustainability efforts into your procurement process can help you stay ahead of requirements, and of course, building resiliency. And then finally, I'm just going to review what can you do as a company today to take a more holistic approach to supply chain data management, especially with sustainability and ESG. So with that being said, Great. And then just one more. Awesome. So where I want to start is organizations' ability to understand and manage the externalities driving many regulatory requirements today is very vital, right? As these externalities tend to occur outside of companies' four walls. So what you're seeing here is a study by the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, and they conducted a study that showed that most of the verticals listed here and show that the majority of their impacts take place within their supply chain. So most manufacturing sectors are looking at between 70 to 90% of their environmental impact occurring upstream. So pretty much no matter where you're located in the supply chain, you have downstream stakeholders, customers, investors, regulators who are requiring disclosure related to impacts, and upstream stakeholders who must engage, that you must engage as the company to get this information. So what is ESG to begin with? ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, is the criteria referred to or used to assess a company's behavior in these impact areas, and used by some investors to screen potential investments. So the finance industry actually first coined the term, and they discovered that businesses have a strong program in place and perform well against these ESG criteria, offer lower risk, and make up for safer long-term investments. So thanks to this, we see ESG trending as regulators, investors, and customers have begun to align around ESG and how we can communicate performance and expectations with a common language, right? So there's an old saying that goes, and I don't know if we can go back to the previous slide. Thank you. But there's an old saying that, that which gets measured gets managed. So one of the big benefits of ESG is that it represents our latest and greatest attempt to really quantify these externalities, so these non-financial risks, so we can start to factor these costs into doing business. So ESG criteria can be implemented really to understand and manage your organization's exposure to these non-financial risks or externalities upstream in the company's supply chain in a more holistic manner in order to meet the mandatory due diligence requirements. So then if we bump ahead to, integrating an ESG risk program into current processes. So if we go to the next slide, the first component to a successful supply chain ESG program is supplier intelligence. So coming back to the idea of, that which gets measured gets managed, it's important to engage with your supply chain and to get an honest assessment on where they are today. And this can be done in data collection methods that I'll touch on later in the presentation. The second is supplier development. So resiliency is built through engagement and collaboration, and it's important to work with your suppliers to help them grow with you over time, right? So it's essential to build foundational knowledge and have your supplier partners understand why they're being asked these questions in terms of where they are and how they can, grow in the future. And then finally, guidance and expertise. So really understanding the regulatory landscape that is consistently evolving and shifting while actively managing ESG in your supply chain to really stay ahead. Okay. So really this, again, represents the growing complexity of requirements in your organization or in companies' organizations and what they're facing and what they could be facing in the near future, as well as a good portion of these particular elements revolve or have incorporated into them supply chain. So the bulk of these drivers relate to environmental and social externalities. And I want us to think of how we can utilize ESG as a lens to identify and manage supplier performance against ES&G criteria, which can benefit companies by taking top-down approach in reducing risk and facilitating compliance with regulatory obligations. So a top-down approach to delivering value to the company in these, three key facets that you can see on the side here, include reducing risk, getting ahead of, regulations and regulators, and driving continuous improvement and resilience. So finally, how to take a holistic ESG approach. Okay, great. So to bring ES&G and supplier management together, companies should start by taking a 360-degree approach to help assess ESG impact and risk. So a 360-degree approach is an absolute necessity in our world today to really capture valid data and identify ESG risk in your supply chain, and create a program that's really built on allowing companies to view supplier data from all angles and ensure accuracy and reliability. So really kind of on the two sides of this visual, what does direct engagement mean? It's configurable ESG, either like questionnaires or surveys that have been mapped to recognize ESG standards, and to really pinpoint where to effectively engage with those frameworks and regulations to then put into potential sustainability reports or to make that public facing in some capacity. And then the indirect engagement is really taking advantage of the information out within the public domain, and trying to assess the risk that's identified within that public space. So here is really just another more comprehensive visual to the other visual that we saw in the previous slide, and it's outlining the appropriate steps in a supplier due diligence process to achieve success in compliance and in overall robustness. So a program should begin with materiality assessment and review, and really assess the business dynamic with all suppliers, all the way to evidence review and corrective actions in terms of the data that is being collected, and again to successfully insert that data into public-facing reports or other material and documentation. So to summarize, externalities are, of course, unaccounted for barriers or risks to sustainability that most often occur within supply chains. So businesses haven't necessarily traditionally been able to quantify these, but we've been hit with a tipping point that on a global scale is realizing that these costs can no longer be ignored. So regulators and regulations and stakeholder pressures are shedding light and working to address these externalities. So the bottom-up approach of addressing specific externalities with regulations create a difficult situation for businesses who must understand the potential impact of where these risks occur upstream in their supply chain and how to demonstrate compliance for their downstream stakeholders. So of course, ESG is emerging as a tool set to understand and manage our companies and organizations' exposure to these externalities in your supply chain, again, in order to meet these requirements. And finally, consistently shifting landscape of regulations and stakeholder requirements related to sustainability and the groundwork needed to move beyond reacting to compliance requirements and proactively engage with your supply chain holistically. If you aren't using, the opportunity to get ahead today, you unfortunately will be behind. So with that being said, thank you guys so much, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I don't see any questions of clarification yet in the Q&A. For those that have been able to join us now, just a reminder, please pop any questions you have for the authors into the Q&A or into the chat section, and we'll circle back to those. Because we've had a bit of a disruption to the program and we had to start halfway through and then circle back, what I'm going to take the luxury of doing is to work through all of our presenters for slots 1 and 2, and then I'm going to ask our presenters, all of them, to stay on, and we'll deal with a consolidated Q&A session at the end, just to make sure we don't eat into the time for the other presenters. So thank you, Jamie. With that, I'm hoping that Dana Silva is with us. He was meant to be our first speaker this afternoon, joining us from Brazil. The title of the presentation is Maturity Management on Resources Efficiency in Small and Medium Enterprises, a Life Cycle Approach. And if I can just ask our conference organizers to just shuffle the presentation deck back to the first presentation so that Dana can start with her presentation. Lovely.
Hi, my name is Daiane Vitória. I'm going to present this work that I did about the material management on resource efficiency, small and medium enterprise, a life cycle approach. This work was performed by our research group in Brazil called Sustainability Engineer from Federal University in São Carlos, in Brazil. Please, next slide. The goal of the study is to analyze the maturity of SMEs in Brazil from the perspective of life cycle management, LCM, in the efficient use of resources. The motivation for this work was because the SMEs are very important in terms of generating job and the economy in all countries worldwide. Also, the SMEs are responsible for the generation of environment pollution, and this is in relation to the low efficient of resource management in this company. For example, in Brazil, 99% of the companies are represented by SMEs, and it is 2018, 50% of the job work from these SMEs as well. Please, next slide. You have used it as a seismic control, a tool recently developed by the green industry. You can see the platform link on the slide, left side. We applied this self-assessment with 9 Brazilian companies. The last year, these companies were from different sectors like food processing, manufacturing, digital services, and the agricultural services. We also have different sites of companies where the small-sized company, medium-sized company, and the 3 large-sized company as well. Here, you can see the interface of the IGO tool. The access is free, and you can analyze the material by company in terms of waste management, material efficiency, use of sustainable chemical, and the other use very important for SME self-assessments. Please, next slide. The main white lights of the resource of this application showed us that more than 50% of the companies do not have the type of action related to the definition of strategy for the company, and also they don't have energy management or material use. And also we found that more 60% of the companies do not have action related to save water, and more than 30% of companies also don't have any action related to waste management. Please, next slide. Also, the results show that only 11% of the companies were classified as advanced or show a very good material in terms of resource efficiency. And only 22% of the companies show advance and material for waste management. Please, next slide. So the best results were found for the large companies in cloud and LCM, and the remaining companies is the case it shows just the beginner or intermediate material levels, because they show a lot of opportunities, mainly related to water, energy, and the use of material efficiency. Next. Actually, they are related to financial incentives because to improve your social deficiency, you need to invest in the better technology and train people. Therefore, it is necessary to bridge financial incentives to motivate companies. Next. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dana. I'm not seeing any questions of clarification yet in the Q&A. I'm also just asking if our conference organizers, if there are any that come in from the app, if they could also just make us aware of them here as well. I think with that, I'd just like to find out if Minori Lee from UNEP is with us already for the second presentation that was on the session. I'm not seeing her as one of the participants, but I'm not sure if there's perhaps a co-author.
She had to cancel because of her personal emergency, but I'm happy to cover for her if needed.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. Sorry to throw you in the hot seat there.
No worries.
But that would be great. So the second presentation of our session today is entitled Sustainability and Circularity in the Textile Value Chain, a Global Roadmap, UNEP Key Priorities and Recommendations for the Sector. Melis, we'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Linda. So basically, today I'm going to give you just a quick update on UNEP's work on sustainability and circularity in the textile value chain and our new roadmap that we launched this year. So basically, to start with, I would like to highlight that, of course, the textile sectors play a key role. So in driving industrialization, trade development, and value. So obviously, it has rapidly developed a regional and global value chain by connecting producers, retailers, and consumers from across the world. It has also huge link with like gender issues, and we have seen with COVID, with the increase of like online sale, that the textile sectors remain one of the key economic driver. At the same time, the textile sector emit like earlier around 2 to 8% of the world greenhouse gas emissions, using the equivalent of 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of natural water resources. And it's also responsible for 9% of microplastic pollution to our oceans. Additionally, the value chain impact has deep social issues, with the textile workers at risk of exploitation, underpayments, forced labor, and health risk. So basically what we have done at UNEP as part of our value chain approach was first to identify the key impacts across the textile value chain, and also to identify best practices. So that was part of our first report, the Global Stock Taking Report. I'm going to share the link after the presentation in the chat. And then as a second phase, we have now developed our roadmap based on our first study. Basically, we did a consultation also with over 140 textile value chain stakeholders to define really a common agenda of transformation towards sustainability and circularity. So basically, we ask them, and we ask ourselves, like, what was the role of each stakeholders, and what was their what was needed to achieve this common goal. So basically here you can see the 3 key priorities that we have identified, which are like shifting consumption patterns, improved practices, and infrastructure investments. And then based on those 3 priorities, we have, sorry, I think I'm going too fast. I'm gonna go back one slide. Yeah, here we go. You can see here the 9 building blocks that we have identified to deliver on the 3 priorities. So I'm not gonna go like in details on which of them, but like you can see here on the slide, 9 building blocks the 9 key drivers that we have identified here to deliver on these 3 priorities and to achieve basically our common goal on the 1.5 Paris Agreement. So you see we have some that are overlapping. So for example, our textile products are designed to minimize impacts and support circular models, which is like between the shifting consumption patterns priorities and also between the improved practices priorities. So basically we wanted something very actionable, something that is reachable and something that would set a common goal for all the textile stakeholders. One of the challenges we face is that obviously, as you are all aware, the textile value chain is very diverse. It's spread across the globe. It's very hard to trace down its key impact and to get all the stakeholders to work together on specific actions. So we wanted those building blocks to be as concrete, as actionable as possible. And if I dive a little bit further into one of the key building blocks, you will see here that the textile value chains, we need to drive resource efficiency and eliminate production pollution, production waste, on-site fossil fuel use, and chemicals of concerns. So in our first study, we saw that an energy efficiency improvement of 50% per production unit in the processing phase has the potential as the potential benefits of 64 MT CO2 emissions between 2019 and 2030. So textile production sites, especially wet processing sites, will require major support and investments to substitute to machinery and apply circular production methods. So this is particularly important for sites beyond tiers 1 and 2 of large multinational brands or production countries without strong policy enforcement on cleaner production. So we have seen this especially in countries in, for example, Africa and Asia, where most of the textile production was implemented and where we see particularly huge impacts. And on the next building block that you can see here, we mentioned that textile raw materials are shifted to sustainable and recycled sources. So material substitution alone could deliver 39 million tons of CO2 emission reduction by 2030. So this is quite a huge impact that we have identified. So therefore, we need to rapidly scale new and more sustainable production and cultivation practices for virgin raw materials. And we also need to mainstream fiber-to-fiber recycling through improved practices as well as investments in waste management system and infrastructure. And finally, if you can see here, our other building block, which relates to infrastructure investments. So we need significant improvements in shared infrastructure, which would be made globally available, for sustainable and circular textile value chain. So again, this would include renewable energy, waste management, and water treatments, as well as additional investment in shared infrastructure to unlock the potential of individual actors to make changes in their own system. So we have seen also that in most of the countries where textiles played a huge factor in the economy, we saw that despite that textile had such a big role, there was a lack of investment made by governments, either at the national or at the local, at the regional level. So I'm not gonna go onto each of the building blocks, but this was just to give you an idea of what like actions that have been identified. And following those 9 building blocks, we saw like nine like action that could be undertaken by the stakeholders, and we saw like 4 gaps that were needed to achieve sustainability and circularity in the textile value chain. You can see here on the slide deck. So one of the gap was share like global industry targets on sustainable and circular textiles. So this is also something that UNEP is working to address. So with GFA, with the Global Fashion Agenda, we are working on industry targets. I can share also with you the link of the work that we have been doing recently with GFA, but basically we have like consultation with different stakeholders to agree like on specific targets for 2025, 2020, 30. So policymakers, we need to create also a cohesive global policy strategy and formalize measurable national plans. And data gathered and analysis tools will need to be improved to support effective decision making. So for instance, and I'm sure, Linda, you're aware of this project in South Africa that we are running with the European Union, INTEX, the innovative textile value chain project, where we use the PAF methodology, so the product's environmental footprint methodology that was developed by the European Union, to apply it to the textile sector and basically help SMEs there in the countries we work with, about like 15 SMEs, to help them to measure their impacts and to analyze better their value chain and to identify ways where they can leverage their impacts. And finally, like knowledge on consumer communication and behavior for circularity will need to be delivered to policymakers and the private sectors as well. So to on this gap, we have worked on a consumer playbook that we launched recently in July. So basically, this communication playbook targeted to consumer and communication professionals in the fashion industry sets like recommendation for marketers on how to shift the narrative to align it to the 1.5 Paris Agreement targets, and also to support consumers in empowering them to make better decisions based on like science, and also to shift like all the narrative linked to overproduction, overconsumption, to make sure that we have a narrative that is aligned with the needs of the industry and also the needs of our planet and changing environments. I can share also the link of the playbook in the chat if you wish, but basically, yeah, this was just to give you an idea of the work that we have done recently to work on those 4 gaps that you can see here on the screen. So with it, I think this is the end of the presentation. So I hope this was clear. Let me know if you have any question regarding the presentation. I'm happy to answer any question in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Melis, and thank you very much for stepping in with the presentation for Noralie. I see that there are some questions in the Q&A, but we have run out of time for slot 1. So if I can ask you if you can respond to those directly online in the Q&A box. And I'd like to move then to slot 2 to give our 3 speakers their sufficient time. Our first speaker up is Qian Zhang from Queen's University in Canada. The title of his presentation is Knowledge Synthesis of the Mine Life Cycle and Mining Value Chain to Address Climate Change. So Qian, if I can ask you to join us for your presentation, and the conference organizers, there we go, will make your presentation available for you. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So, hello, everyone. My name is Qian Zhang from Queen's University. It's my great pleasure to be here. So, this work is some work I work with my student, and we just submitted a paper. I'm excited here to report some progress on the knowledge synthesis of the mine life cycle and the mining value chain to address climate change. So basically, this is some background information. If someone already know this pretty clearly, so I can skip a little bit, but I guess that maybe some people need to know more context of the project background. So basically, if we want to achieve the kind of roadmap for net zero or the carbon neutrality, we need to understand the current reporting and accounting standards for carbon footprint. So basically, the International Council on Mining and Metals, they follow this scope 1, 2, 3, the kind of standards. So for scope 1 emissions, they're basically coming from the direct emission under control by the enterprises. And for scope 2 emissions, we refer to the purchase, the electricity, cooling, heating, and those power. And those emissions beyond scope 1 and 2 are scope 3 emissions. But the question here is that each different mining company, they have their own strategic plan to achieve their carbon neutrality, or they design their own roadmap to reduce carbon footprint. Some mining companies have very ambitious plan, including the scope 3 emissions in their carbon neutrality plan. But some mining companies just commit to reduce their scope 1 emissions. Some company between those two type of the commitment. So this is also related to that how we should look at the mining companies or mining sector's responsibility to contribute to the climate change, to reduce their carbon footprint, and to contribute to the whole society's effort to transition to the new kind of low carbon economy. So please move to the next slide. Given this kind of background, we try to understand that what is the effective framework to discuss this question. We try to understand the potential existing evidence between the mining sector's effort to address climate change and their existing practice or their kind of the ongoing discussions or debate. So we select some key, like the keywords, including climate change, mining life cycle, mining value chain, and try to see that what is kind of the overlap between those research or empirical studies. So why did we choose the mine life cycle and mining value chain in this study? Because historically speaking, there were some like these holistic frameworks have been developed to address the mining companies like the social responsibility and also their extended producers responsibility. So some people will look at this problem from the life cycle perspective, and some people address this issue from a value chain perspective. So we wonder that how we can balance these two perspectives. Is there any overlap or knowledge gap? So basically, we want to address the environmental impact associated with different stage of the mine projects, and also try to know that how we can embed the value chain perspective with their commitment for the net zero roadmap. So please, next slide. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. The first kind of the result or the highlight is about the comparison between the mining life cycle and the mining value chain. Actually, we found a very interesting the comparison here. So when people talk about the mine life cycle, they actually more focus on project life cycle. They talk about the life cycle of this mine from the initial stage, from the exploration, and then mine design, mine planning, then construction, production, delivery, and then mine closure. Now we even consider those activities related to long-term monitoring or rehabilitation during the post-closure. But when some people from like life cycle assessment study or from other perspective, they actually talk about product life cycle. This is also related to the global production network perspective. They look at the product, look at the function unit that can be provided by the mining industry. So starting from the extraction to the processing, manufacturing, end use, and end of life. So clearly, you can see that the mining play a strategic role from the both perspective. One from the project life cycle, another perspective is related to global value chain or global production network. So related to specific terminology, like the mining value chain, mineral value chain, they could be very confusing. If you look at the kind of the literature or just look at the mass media, you will find different people interpret those terms in different ways with different scopes. So, for example, when we talk about the mine to mill strategy to reduce the energy consumption in the mining, so basically they focus on the optimization between the mining stage and some of the extractive metallurgy activities. And some people will address mining value chain actually include the majority part of the project life cycle. And some people will talk about like how we can harmonize or we consider both primary supply and secondary supply of those critical minerals from the life cycle perspective or from the global value chain perspective. So the first thing we need to clarify is what are you really talking about related to the mine life cycle or mining value chain, especially about the mining value chain. This is more confusing. And also there are some subtle differences between mining value chain and mineral value chain, because we found evidence that when some scholars address mineral value chain, they actually include those minerals may not be mined. So include like recycling or other activities. So we see that this is kind of broader, the kind of term, but with the similar boundary and scope. So next slide, please. So basically, we follow this kind of rigorous examination between the definition and the empirical case from the project lifecycle and the mining value chain. We then try to get some the knowledge from those two parts of the literature, stage by stage, consider their value chain kind of inside and also environmental or regulation implications. This is just some highlights from our review. For example, at the exploration or feasibility stage, we need to carefully consider some climate change risk as early as possible when you do the early evaluation, like a pre-feasibility study. When the second part is about the mine planning and design, this is very critical because although the most like the carbon footprint actually incurred during the construction and the operation, but a mine design can determine the path how you actually deliver and actually we lock in this process. So it's important to consider those like the climate change indicators and also consider some scenarios to reduce the carbon footprint at the mine stage, planning stage with their existing optimization tools. The second thing, next slide. At the operation stage and the mine closure, there are a lot of like technical options that you can have to reduce carbon footprint, but we just want to highlight two things. The one is about the potential synergies between mine waste management and carbon sequestration solution. The second one is about we need to carefully think about the risk about premature mine closure. These have the damage from both the financial perspective and the climate change perspective. So next slide. The last slide is just want to call for collaboration. This is just starting point. We want to address the kind of the linkage between mining value chain and the mining's responsibility to fight climate change. We'd be very happy to work with other people to look at the opportunities across each stage of the mine life cycle and the mining value chain, and how we can contribute to the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chen. Thank you. It was a very insightful and a very interesting presentation. That I see there is one question which I think is posed to you in the question chat box around the role of carbon capture, use and storage. So if I could ask you perhaps just to answer that one online or in the chat box, and we will move on to the next presenter if that's all right with you. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to move to Angie Felling, who is joining us from Germany, I think. The title of the presentation is EU Project Circular Foam, Transforming the Value Chain of Rigid Polyurethane Foams. Angie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm going to hand over to the last of our three speakers for slot 2 this afternoon, which is Adeyemi Adelekan. Apologies if I've mispronounced that terribly. The title of the presentation is Designing Digitally Enabled Collaborative Business Models for a Plastic Circular Economy in the UK. So Adeyemi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Adeyemi. I'm here speaking on behalf of my colleagues, Maria, Michael, Christopher, Helen, and Torrit. We are all working on this interesting project called One Bean to Rule Them All, which, if I can show, okay, maybe like next slide anyway. So so we have a paper. I can't move to it. Okay, no. Okay, yeah. So we have a paper out already on this particular project that basically introduced the context behind the project. So I really wouldn't explain it a lot, but the whole idea behind One Bin is that we can collect all plastic waste in a bin and then utilize the advance in digital technologies to enable both the collection and the separation of this plastic so that you are able to then move them into the best fit for those plastics, whether it is chemical recycling or mechanical recycling or maybe a reuse system. So that is basically the whole idea, because at the moment plastics are collected, and I mean, at least in the UK, within the UK context, plastics are collected in different bins. Some plastics are not recyclable at the end of life, so they go into the general bin, into incineration, and they release a lot of greenhouse gas emission into the environment. I mean, this is sort of some of the statistics around plastics, that we have a problem in plastics, which I think I don't need to go into details about. There is likelihood that we might have more plastics in the ocean than we have fish by 2050. So we need to solve the plastic problem. And in the UK context, we are proposing a vision of one bin that can enable us to actually address the problem of plastic, at least in the UK, and then in the future across in Europe and then across the world. Next slide, please. Let me see if I can do it here. No. Right. I think you still have the old slide. I don't know, because I sent a new slide. So you know, I had a slide initially sent that had a lot of slide, and I was told to cut it down. So I reduced it and sent it. So the new one has not been uploaded. So if you could keep moving, I don't want to go into details in all of this. Again, yeah, this is where, yeah, right. Can I do it from here? Might be easier. Right.
You're given access. You're given control of the slides. If you can accept control of the screen, yeah.
Right. Let me try. So am I supposed to just click or just move? Yeah. Okay. I think it's responding now. If that is me. Oh, anyway. I don't know if that is me or not. So I'm just going to call for next slide. It's not working for my hand. I'm so sorry. Apologies. So so this is right. Okay, apologies, because I've got a better slide. I could share my screen from here, you know, if this is going to help, because this is the whole slide. So as I was saying, this is the idea of one bin. I want to move past this idea of one bin into the project itself.
Yeah.
So if you can please.
Would it be easier if you share the slides?
Please, let me just share my screen. Thank you very much, because you have the whole slide, unfortunately. So I'm going to share. Oh, you have disabled screen sharing. Can you help enable that? still can share.
So this session seems to have been the one that was jinxed for today, so apologies.
The thing was, I had an initial slide sent, and I was told to cut it down. So I cut it down and sent a new one, and the old one has been.
It wasn't integrated.
Yeah.
If you can accept the controls of the slides now.
Okay, let me try. Am I supposed to press a button like next on my computer? Because that's what I'm doing, and it's not.
You get a prompt to accept the control, and then you can move the slides.
All right, let me see. Give up, remove side-by-side keyboard layout. Okay, there is no prompt here. It says you can control the wall resource, so I guess I should be able to.
Yes, can you move the slides?
Yeah, so it doesn't seem to be moving. So maybe do I need to click?
Yeah, now you're controlling the screen. See, okay, now it's resolved.
Yeah. There is there's a slight delay in the slides moving. So just be aware, if you press it too many times, you move quite quickly and you don't see it yet.
Quickly. Right. Okay. I think it's moving now. All right. Good. Thank you very much. Apologies for everyone. Thanks for the patience. So this was the paper I was talking about, which I believe will probably be available later for anyone that is interested. It provides a background behind this project called One Beam to Rule Them All. So in that particular paper, we talked about what is needed, and one of those is collaborative business model, which is exactly the work package that I'm leading together with Maria Shamina, both at the University of Manchester. So I will be presenting to you some of the findings from this collaborative business model work that we're doing with about 16 stakeholders across the plastic sector, that is across the plastic value chain. And the whole, I've already explained this whole idea of one beam, so I will move fast away from that. And these are the different economic realities. So we're looking at it from material, economic, and also the social realities of actually enabling this one beam system for plastics in the UK. And the focus of our own work, which is the collaborative business model work, is two questions, which is what are those potential collaborative value propositions for a circular UK plastic system that could be enabled by this application of advanced digital technologies? And the second question is, how would value then be created and delivered from those value propositions? So that's what I basically will talk about today. So we use different methods to collect our data from this consortium of working group of stakeholders. Then we have stakeholders from across the upstream of the supply chain to all the downstream of supply chain. So from your producers all the way to your material recovery facilities, your MRFs and your processors. So we've conducted interviews, 2 rounds of that. We've done workshops, which is a co-creation workshop where we brought stakeholders together to try to start to envision and develop this business model that will basically deliver value for all stakeholders across the chain, because without that, you really cannot drive the necessary collaboration that is going to be needed to enable any kind of circular system, whether it's plastic or any other type of materials. And we also then have pilots that we plan in the future to test the business models that we develop from this particular approach. I won't go into details of that. So the first question, the findings so far from the work that we've done and from all the data collections that we've had, is that we found that there are 2 types of business models that are sort of very immediate and that could be created that are like quick wins for all stakeholders across the chain through this one bin system or one bin vision. And that one of them is the creation of a food-grade polypropylene feedstock. PP is polypropylene feedstock. It's a type of plastic material usually used in food packaging, and is one of the hardest to recycle at the moment, at least in the UK. Most of it end up in incineration. So, but we do see these as stakeholders identify this as one of the areas that one bin could actually enable a quick win and a quick delivery of value for all the stakeholders across the chain. But we also found that there is also an opportunity here for an open data set for transparency and accountability of packaging that is put on the market. So POM is put on the market. So any packaging that gets put on the market, because of the application of advanced digital technology now, we will be able to see what happens to that plastic once it enters the cycle and all the way towards its end of life, and when it's recycled back into material resources that then go back into packaging. So we can trace that, and we can see that happening. So these 2 types of value could be created from a one bin system enabled by digital technologies. And as a result of that, stakeholders do see a lot of value for that, for the organizations from that. So a lot of economic values to be created. because I mean, starting from last year, there has been a suite of legislations that is eating the plastic sector, at least in the UK here. We have a packaging tax, plastic packaging tax that was passed last year, was passed last year in April. And that is going to basically fine any organization whose packaging doesn't have a 30% recycled content in their packaging when it's put on the market. So that is just one, and there are about 2 others that are coming in the coming years, in like next year or 2, where you have like the extended producer responsibility and you have the deposit response scheme. So lots of legislations, and these are going to come with heavy fines. So stakeholders are quite concerned about that, and they do see one bin as an opportunity for them to be able to avoid some of those costs and to actually save some money. So there's a lot of economic value that could be created, but also social value as well, because at the moment a lot of smaller brands are not getting accessibility to feedstock because there is not much available. So they see one bin as solving that problem, that social problem in the supply chain, but they also see one bin as also enabling those plastics that couldn't be recycled before to now be recyclable. So therefore, there's also an environmental value to this. Now, in terms of how could those value be created, so we found 2 ways. So one is value retention model, which is like I said initially, the retainment of value, for example, for hard to recycle plastic like polypropylene. So they do see that happening. That's a particular model, and how that model could be created is by the application of those digital technology, like I said, like a tag, which could go in either at the label manufacturer, place, or the manufacturer, that is the product manufacturer itself. So you could put it on a label, or you could put it directly on the product, and then that enables you to be able to trace and track the material on to its end of life. And when it gets to the MERF and the PERF, you are able to then sort it out for it to go back into the value chain. So this is sort of the way to create that value. But for that system, that framework there to create value, the cost of tag has to be cheaper than the cost of the tax. That is for upstream stakeholders. So the cost of the government tax that is eating the sector has to be cheaper. We'll move that away. Has to be cheaper than the cost of the tag. But also downstream is the fact that the capture rate that is enabled by that application of that digital technology has to be more than the cost that is going to take for them to implement or execute the application of that tag. So there are systems that needs to be in place for that particular model to create value. That's basically what we're saying. Then right. So the second model, which is the data as a service model, I mentioned initially that the application of digital technologies will enable transparency of the packaging across the supply chain. So there's a model there that could be created. There's a value creation opportunity there. And if you can see in the next slide, you're going to see the different ways that is going to create value, because from the retailer all the way to the MERF and the PERF, you will be able to read different kind of data sets, which you can use for different kind of purposes, like compliance, like marketing, like guiding consumers to know what to do with plastics, like enhanced composition analysis at the MERF. So there are different ways that you could create value. You could create and capture value from just enabling digital transparency of that particular packaging across the plastic value chain. So, but for that system as well to make sense or to create value, you need to ensure that it is done within an open standard. So we found out that needs to be within an open data standard, which is a conversation that is currently ongoing right now, at least in the plastic sector here in the UK. How do we develop a data standard to guide all of these new systems that are going to emerge as a result of digital technology advancement? But quickly to end the session, I want to talk about governance issues that we also noted, because when we talk about collaborative business model, we are talking about multiple stakeholders coming together to create systems that then create values for each of their different organizations for them to capture. And that usually we have governance issues. So what we found is that there are 3 main governance tensions. There's a governance tension around the incentivization of investment in that digital recycling infrastructure. Who is meant to be responsible for the purchase of the digital technologies? So there's that conversation that creates tension. So for some stakeholders, they do feel like, well, that needs to be cost prohibitive. We don't have to pay from our own pocket. While for other stakeholders, they're concerned about, well, if you make sure that stakeholders don't have to pay for this tag, then that could create a lock-in system whereby you have stakeholders stuck on recycling and not moving up the sustainability kind of chain towards like more reuse systems. And they will sort of think recycling is convenient, it doesn't cost us anything, and they will be stuck there. And we need to move more towards sustainable systems, which recycling is not there yet. But we also have we saw another governance activity as well, which is around securing government mandate. to restrict one bin membership into just only those people that are participating in it. And a lot of people see that as a problem, because if you restrict some people out of the system and you only keep it within a few people just because of competitive advantage, that will create issues as well, and there might not be collaboration. But I mean, because of time, I probably won't run through this. The third what's called tension is around
move on to your concluding slide.
Yes. Right. Thank you. So the conclusion is basically digital technology application can definitely enable a closed loop system. We found that out. It's possible. It can create this continuous cycle of value creation and value capture. But we also know that digital technology still cannot enable that for plastic, at least at all in the UK, because there are some plastic types that it can't work on, like films, like composite materials. It's still a challenge for those systems to be secular. But we also know that there are governance tensions, and those governance tensions could create what we call stakeholder hesitancy, because, of course, stakeholders do not have agreement on what should be done within a particular value chain to be able to make sure that the materials there are recyclable. So there are issues of governance that need to be sorted out in order to make sure that value chains are circular and sustainable. I will leave it there. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know. Apologies for the slight delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adeyemi. That brings us to the end of our session. Unfortunately, with the starting late and the shuffle of the order of the presentations, we have not been able to spend time with our presenters in a more detailed Q&A session. So for those who have joined us online for this afternoon's webinar, I'd encourage you, please, if you do have questions, reach out to the various presenters here today, the authors, through the app. I think all of the presenters have also provided their contact details at the end of the slide, so please do engage with them. I know there have been a couple of calls for collaboration and partnership, so take up the call where you see opportunity to collaborate and engage with our various presenters. With that, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers for this afternoon. On behalf of the conference organizers, my apologies for the delay in the start for today's session. Thank you for bearing with us as we sorted things out and got back on track for this afternoon. And thank you very much for your excellent presentations.